Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's my great privilege to be the moderator of this webinar today. And today we are here from Saritha, who will lecture on building the national scenarios database. And I have known Saritha for more than 10 years now, and I can assure you that for sure, Saritha is a rising star in our community. And not by coincidence, last year she was the IAMC Extraordinary Contribution Award recipient. And together with Shinichiro Fujimori and myself, Saritha leads the scientific working group on national models. And so it's my pleasure to have Saritha here. And Saritha, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Roberto. It's a privilege to be working with you. And let me share my presentation. uh, uh, I'll just check. Is it in the slideshow mode?
Yes.
Okay, great. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you who took out time to attend this webinar. Thank you very much. It has been a privilege to be part of this community. Uh, I think with the IMC, I first attended IMC in 2019. And since then, I have been trying to actively contribute in the form of a SSE scientific community member, and as well as with the scientific working group as a co-chair of this scientific working group on national scenarios with Shinichiro and Roberto. Hopefully, we will be publishing a lot of our work in the coming months. So I look forward to that. And what I will be doing in this webinar is providing kind of a history on how the last 3 years I've spent basically building this network and what we are going to do, what are the next steps. So before starting, I really want to acknowledge Shinichiro Fujimori, Professor Shinichiro Fujimori and Roberto, who have been co-chairs and have been always guiding me throughout this entire process. The scenario modeling teams who have been really enthusiastic, really patient with me, and working with from the model registration to the submission to now we are working on our publications. With the registration, I would like to really thank Philip and David, who have been really patient because this is kind of a non-funded kind of an exercise. And they still took out time and have registered more than 100 modeling teams, which is fantastic. And then from a data quality check perspective, I would like to thank the RAs that I've had, Aloki and Shoaib, and the PhD student Anuj, who has been helping me the past couple of years. With that, the outline I would talk about the history when it comes to model scenarios, databases, and the IPCCARs, the motivation behind the first study, the process we had, some initial results, insights, the challenges and limitations we faced, and basically ending it with the open call and feedback for the next study we are planning to have in the next few months. From a history, when we talk about models and scenario development, it has more than 5 decadal history. What I've done is divided into like the 20 years. So 1970s, 18, the main motivation was the energy crisis of the 73, 74, where it is very interesting to see like how USA as a country responded to the energy crisis versus how Japan as a country responded. And here, with this, in US, there were some dominant models that emerged to look into the future energy pathways. And these were like standalone institutional models from a geographic focus. Mostly it was US. In the 80s, the YASA project started this modeling in the late 80s, in the late 70s, early 80s in Europe. And then from a consortium, I think by early 80s, the Stanford Energy Modeling Forum, which is started by John Wayant and his colleagues, and he's still a very prominent chair who has been keeping this going for the last more than 40, 50 years. In phase two, we talked about the 90s and 2000s. Here, it's quite interesting with the setup of IPCC, UNFCCC. So it's a scientific output going into the policy making of climate change. And here, there were integration of the energy systems model with the climate models, and the global IAMs basically developed during the early 90s across. So in USA, I think it was a minicam team, so the PNNL. Then we had the MIT team in MIT. Then we had the Stanford EMF. And then in Europe, I think we had YASA and their colleagues who basically developed the global IAMs and were part of the IPCC AR4, AR3, AR4, AR5, all the ARs. It's quite interesting because I think along AR3, AR4, the Japan, we had Matsuoka Sensei, Morita-san, and Kainuma-san, who've actually developed a database infrastructure. This was the first web-based centralized metadata of all the scenarios. The focus from a geography, it was global models with maybe 5, 10, 17 regions, depending across the 2 decades. And the consortium like Stanford EMF was there, but other project consortiums were beginning to happen. And then we have the final from 2010s, what has been, so more standardization and granularity with Paris Agreement. There's a whole rise of regional and national models. We had a multimodal network, the Stanford EMF in the 80s, 90s, but it was mostly in US. But here, and then during 90s, there were global multimodal intercomparisons. And now from 2010, especially from I think 2013, 14, we had the EU EMF, and then all the Asian MIPS like China, Japan, South Korea, India coming in into focus. From a database infrastructure, from the web-based, I think YASA took over. The YASA database has developed. And now we have project platforms like the DDP platform, IAM Paris, where you see these scenarios, and Zenodo is another mode where you could have the open source platform for data. Geography focus now, it's growing along with global, it's going granular. So you have national, regional, sectoral, local, and consortiums now, along with Stanford, you have the DDP network, the LCS network. There are various modeling networks that we will be discussing around. With IPCC AR6, which has been the driver of these databases, we had the special report on emission scenarios in 2000, which had 46 scenarios. Then we had the AR4, which had about 1,000 scenarios with a temporal scope of 1990 to 2100. And then we had AR5 with 1200, the special report on 1.5, which had 400, and AR6 had 1500 plus scenarios. One can also see the focus of models. So it was initially global. By 2012, so in the last decade, there was regional, and it was in the last IPCC cycle, they gave, I think, more space to the national, and now we have SR cities, so the local as well. In terms of dimension as well, emissions and energy were the focus, but now with the SR 1.5, AR6, it has become multidimensional with themes like SDGs, ecosystems, enablers, feasibility, and so on coming into picture. In chapter 4, there was a broad literature about the global mitigation pathways. However, not as much when we talk about the country level pathways, especially in peer-reviewed literature. And it mentioned that there were different methods and models to analyze when it comes to implications. These are the short-term implications, medium-term implications of the policies and NDCs. And when we look at country-level studies, the emission coverage, scenario coverage, sectoral coverage, policy coverage completely differed across board. So hence doing a intercomparison study was much more difficult at that point of time, and collecting the data also was difficult. With no communities or organization to collect the data, the comparability of data scenarios are expected, but how do we map it with the global picture? There was a need to tackle the climate policies, which were frequently being revised, especially at a national level. With this motivation, the IMC Scientific Working Group on National Scenarios was founded by Professor Shinichiro Fujimori, and then it was co-chaired with Professor Roberto Schaefer in 2021. For the next couple of years, nothing major happened, and then I came on board in 2023, where we wanted, the whole motivation was how do we prepare a national scenario database that could then hopefully contribute to the IPCC ARs in future. So complement and supplement the major critique of the global IAMs and put forward a bottom-up kind of what are the policy implementation or planning that is going on. With this in mind, the main objectives was standardization of the national scenario development activities to increase comparability and use of assessment, to bridge the national activities with the regional as well as the global activities that are taking place, provide a platform to share the best practices that are going on, like we have the feasibility, equity, model diagnostics across the national teams, facilitate dialogue with the IMC community and other communities. Now we have the equity community, the finance community who are getting interested in national scenarios, and then very important for archive and documentation of all the national scenarios around the world. Keeping this in mind, just one more, I would like to talk about the capacity building of these models. So in AR6, there were global, some national models that were there, but they were not able to provide to the AR6. They had a lot of challenges they faced to submit their data. And when I did the literature review, when I started, what I found was there were more than 175 national models across the world, across the literature, some of which, like most of which I saw developed in Asia. There were North America, Europe, South America, Africa. These were additional models than the 50 models that were there. And when you look at the modeling network, as you can see, like AIM, which is the Asia Pacific Integrated Assessment Modeling, it has 30 years of capacity building. So Japan took charge of the countries in South Asia, Southeast Asia to develop, East Asia to develop the models that could be used for the emission pathways at national level, and also for the national energy as well as climate policies. In Europe, we had message, image, remind, which, but when it came to European models, E3M, Times, LEAP, they were there. US, the GCAM, Minicam model, famous. I think EPA also is there for MIT, but they have not participated in this study. And then mostly you could see message model basically also now having national models in addition to AIM, GCAM, Times, and LEAP. So I think AIM, GCAM, message are more institutional models. Times, LEAP, I think they are also used at a commercial level as well. When it came to Africa, what we saw, and you will see that there was a huge gap. I think Osmosis Modeling Network is working around this. And then with network like ICISA that they have started, hopefully there would be a growth of modeling in Africa that would be observed in the coming decades. With this, I would like to briefly present the study one. The study one, what we did was collect all the modeling teams. We wanted to register all the modeling teams and then hopefully ask them if they would be interested to participate in the scenario protocol that we had. And then consolidate all these scenarios, have a short data validation, and then do certain assessments and try to publish this data. This was building on the IPCC Chapter 4 work. what we did was prepare a scenario protocol with reference, which is the baseline scenario, the current policy scenario, and the net zero scenario. Here, mostly in project, what happens is a carbon budget is given to a national modeling team in the past, and they had to prepare scenarios. But here we basically allowed the teams to provide the net zero scenario or current policy scenario they felt the most could be applicable for their country, and then collect that scenario. And from peer-reviewed literature, gray literature, the international projects that we had, we tried to collect the scenarios, the teams who were participating. We got in touch with the energy modeling forum teams across Europe, Japan, China, Korea, and India and Asia. And then also through modeling networks, which have been there and we were aware of. We collected, it took almost 1.5 years to collect because the whole registration process, there were a lot of challenges, submission process, there were a lot of challenges. And then hopefully now we have a database, which I'm pretty sure we will be contributing to the IPCC AR process, especially chapter 3 and sectoral chapters, because there were many teams that also submitted data at a sectoral level, so they are interested. And the good part over here is I think we'll be able to publish this data once the publication occurs on the Scenario Compass national platform whenever the papers are published. Given the status, we had more than 130 teams who were interested to participate in this exercise, and one can see it's all over the world. So we were able to capture a lot of teams in Asia, North America, South America, but one can see that there were gaps in Europe and Africa. I think, registered more than now 100 teams, of which now I think we have 70 national modeling teams in the most recent database that we have. When it comes to covering countries, we are covering more than 36 countries, but with E3M coming in, I think with Europe, we'll be crossing more than 50 countries now. In terms of emission coverage, we have covered about 70% of the CO2 emission coverage with the 36, 37 countries. And if we take into consideration EU, Southeast Asia as a region, then it would be more than 82% of the emission coverage. From the 136 models that we have on database, about, I think more than 100 now have been registered. 50 of these models are national, regional, and we had in this study 57 models along with the global models that have submitted data. And one can see, based on the survey, like almost 50% of the teams have submitted scenarios for the first study. Most of the teams, they were divided when it comes to energy system models, computed general equilibrium models, or IAMs, which could be a combination of the ESMs and the CGE model. And then in terms of sectoral coverage, it was quite interesting to note that there were teams which have AFLU with them, but mostly the teams that participated were energy system modeling teams without the AFLU model. And then we had energy supply, energy demand, and even AFLU sectoral models who have contributed to this exercise. In terms of GHG coverage, we observed that there were models who could provide all GHG. There were models who could provide carbon dioxide, methane, N2O, but most modeling teams who have participated in the first study were providing us only with the CO2 in terms of emission coverage. Now, just going to the results, we have now prepared the National Scenarios Dataset 2025. We plan to do that for the same almost every year if possible, or every 2 years, to have a national scenarios climate mitigation like database where the teams submit their scenarios and we collect them. We provide a description of this data set. We compare them with basic socioeconomic databases like for population and GDP, and then emissions and the energy, and provide that initial data quality check. We do not filter the scenarios. We just inform the teams that it passed or failed and maybe they would want to look into, or also check about the national database, because some teams use the national database to prepare the national scenarios. And we have seen the certain discrepancies or differences between an international database when it comes to emissions as well as energy versus a national database when it comes to energy balance. So maybe that would be a new thing that we have to bring in based on how the studies progress. This is just an example to show. We asked, initially, I prepared a list of 180 variables, and then we went back to the teams to get feedback. Based on the feedback, the 180 variables were increased to 196 variables. And across the teams, you could see that the variables they submitted ranged minimum from 20 to, there were teams that submitted, like the global downscaling teams, almost 457 variables. So that was a lot. In terms of what variables were submitted, one can see that most modeling teams that participated in this exercise submitted the primary energy, primary energy, final energy, various secondary energy. Not everyone submitted, but when it came to AFALU, we just have like 5 teams that have submitted this data. In terms of revised quality criteria, what was interesting to note was initially with the IPCC process, the EU EMF process, like energy and IPU variable was used as one of the criteria. And we observed that we cannot use this criteria because there would be teams, especially national teams, which have more FLU-based systems where they would not be able to provide industry emissions. So it would be better for us to shift to a variable where it's a common denominator across all the teams. And we found that CO2 emissions and then CO2 emissions energy were the most, I think, submitted variables. For threshold criteria, right now we have kept it at 20%, but looking at teams, it could also be 30%. So we could be flexible depending on the next few studies that we do after feedback from the team. But with FLU, it could be, I think, more than 50% looking at the global reference database. How is the data quality check done? So once you have the scenario database, you have the reference database in place, and here we use the references from the 2024 because we started that year. And then this is just an example to show, like, across countries for emission CO2, most modeling teams were within the percentage range of 20%. But there were certain teams which were not. And this is a 2015 data. But then when we look at 2020, it may fall. And the same when it comes to energy, it also decreased. And we looked at net zero, but we looked across. So there is this across teams, across years, from 2005 to 2020, and now it will be 2025. So we do this quality check. It's just there for publication. It is not there for filtering that data. We just then publish the data as is. Then it's up to the people who want to use that data for further analysis or assessment, like the IPCC process. They can do their own kind of data quality check to filter and then provide their analysis. Uh, so that was paper 1. The paper 2 was about the commonalities and differences. Here we characterize the similarities and differences in the national mitigation trends, identify the robust mitigation pathways that can serve as reference pathways, map cumulative national net zero and aggregate the emissions across national net zeros to see the progress of the global mid-century carbon budgets. And this is just an example to show, like, when we look at the carbon intensity, the drivers were mainly due to the aggressive fossil fuel phase down of fossil fuels. When we look at the renewables, it was very interesting to see there was a huge variation in deployments, especially the solar and wind across countries. And even the electricity share, one can see that if we compare it to the C1, C2, C3, both at a global level and Asia level, the net zero median that we have and the variation that we have from our study, it's much more higher in the short term, but in the long term for Asia, it's similar, but and yeah, in the long term, it's almost similar. So it was quite interesting to see that. We also did a comparison with the effort sharing process at a country level, and one could see that high income countries, they were higher than the allocated equity based budget. So there was an overshoot there. And upper middle income, it aligned with the C1, C2 temperature goals, and lower, it was under the, especially one can see Nepal and Vietnam, and even India for certain effort sharing schemes. What were the challenges? So, in terms of registration, it was very interesting to understand the model versions and the regions because most modeling teams, if it's a national model, it's one country. There were subnational teams, which were sub-regional, or state or province that basically aggregated together. So we had to have that list of that aggregation so we could basically prepare the modeling. In terms of submissions, we had various kinds of errors like the taxonomy, there were missing indexes, there were unidentified items across the columns, there were formatting errors, there were missing sheets, there were unit discrepancies, and just going through it one by one took a lot of time because it was first time for both of us. So me handling, collecting, and then looking at them, and then helping the teams across board. In terms of data collection, as we started looking, the start years differed across. So we had teams submitting 2005, 10, 20. Many teams mostly submitted from 2020. The end year also basically differed across teams. It could be 2050 to 2100. Global teams mostly submitted till 2100. In terms of variables across models, there were 20 variables to 450 variables that were submitted. We just requested for 196. So it's good that to know that model teams can submit more variables. Emission variables are submitted, but few teams did not submit the population and GDP variables. With GDP, it was quite interesting to also see the base years kind of maybe different. The currency could be different, so we had to do that. And global models submitted the GDP PPP data versus national models mostly submitted the GDP market exchange rate data. So having that conversion, if you want to compare data, would be quite important. In terms of coverage discrepancies, we did not, as you could see, have Africa and Europe countries, national scenarios. Non-CO2, the GHG, we could not cover all GHG. So if you go for UNEP gap report, if you want to contribute there, teams have to submit all the GHG and then they can participate in UNEP gap report. Sectoral coverage, FLU was very much missing. So hopefully in the next study, we are trying to get in touch with teams that are FLU centered to get them because non-CO2 emissions are equally important, especially from Global South perspective. In terms of variables, carbon price, installed capacity, secondary energy variables, macroeconomic variables, technology costs, we observed that these are very important variables as we were writing the paper. So hopefully we'll be able to capture if the teams are able to submit these variables and details on policy level, because if you're comparing policies to have certain details, but this I think would be a more time consuming process, or maybe in later studies we try to take that into account. With missing variables, we tried to get back with most teams. Emissions also we tried to get back, but then we now have got almost all the teams. But secondary energy variables, it was quite interesting that many teams did not submit that. So hopefully in the second study, we'll be able to. In terms of papers, one can see that we have the national scenario data set that hopefully we'll submit by next week. The commonalities and differences paper we've submitted to Nature Climate Change. The first revision has come, so hopefully we'll be able to revise and submit again by next month. And there are a couple more papers in line. So one is just the drivers of mitigation. The other is gap analysis, feasibility assessment. So this would be quite interesting paper. And then the national scenarios in a global context, and some scenarios are selected and how they perform in with the global scenario. So that also would be quite interesting. with that in mind, I just want to inform all the teams who are there. We also have a special issue. So what we are doing is a cross-country kind of analysis, but here we are also calling for papers at a national level, individual countries, even within regions, if they want to submit. Please do submit, because one of the critique was there were not enough peer-reviewed literature when it comes to national scenarios, national models. So hopefully with this we can support that. And the special issue opened in March. The deadline is December 31st. So if you plan to, if you have any papers in progress and plan to submit, please let me know, and we'll see how we can help you with the entire process. Uh, Keeping this in mind, what are the ongoing studies that are taking place? So we have the call for national scenarios from IPCC. So with the second study, we'll hopefully be able to support this call for national scenarios. We are also kind of an example of a national scenario database. There's a global scenario database, but now we are becoming an example of a national scenario database. We're having like a whole scenario template, so intercomparability becomes quite easier, and further analysis using that data becomes quite easier. So it's kind of collecting and having that repository at a global scale. I think there are countries like China, Europe, Japan, South Korea, which have it at a national scale, US. But now we are trying to have it at a global scale, and hopefully this can be used by regional, national, and global policy for global policy making. I'll also briefly present the study two. And then with the other, I think there's a EUEMF. Africa also would have, ICISA may have their own studies. There's an ongoing study in Japan. I think the JMIP 3 is completed, so they may start with JMIP 4. China, Yangwu, I think, is also trying to collect Chinese scenario data. So that is a huge task, because they have, I think, more than 50 or 70 modeling teams across India. We have Niti Aayog, which is the government think tank that have already done this exercise. However, it's used for government purposes, so I don't know if they would publish the data. I'm also doing co-leading with Professor Garg, and we have most Indian teams participating in this national model intercomparison work. So hopefully we'll try to publish within this year, early next year. And then in France, I think CIRED has done a call for national scenarios, and then in US, there's Blistein who's working. With that, I'll just shift to the study two, that we basically have published, and I would request Pat to share the link with everyone. So with IPCC having this open call to assess broad and diverse range of quantitative, qualitative scenarios to support this effort, with the published preprints and everything, we are basically trying to have develop another database which would hopefully address the gaps identified from the first study, and based on the feedback from the teams, especially in the last IMC annual meeting, because they wanted to submit multiple net zero, multiple CPS scenarios. We are trying, have organized the second study. The research question: so how do decarbonization net zero strategies impact the emission and energy pathways across countries? What are the country specific characteristics that emerge with the update of the current policies, that is NDC 3.0, and the multiple national net zero scenarios? How feasible are these scenarios? We are trying the feasibility assessment and getting really interesting results. So it would be great to work together to develop feasibility indicators for national scenarios, and hopefully inform at a global level what works for national scenarios. At sectoral level, many sectors are having net zero targets. So looking deep diving into sectors would be quite kind of interesting. And what we have understood is understanding the models also becomes quite important in all these exercises. So hopefully we'll have a survey that we'll share later on to get the socioeconomic technology policy assumptions in each of your models. And it would be maybe a 10-15 minute survey, but it would serve a huge purpose when it comes to national, regional, subnational models. What are the drivers, and then what are the gaps that are still there that we need to fill? That would be interesting. So it is basically to improve the scenario data evidence, collect the multiple national net zero pathways as per the feedback from national teams, assess these pathways to explore the mitigation trends, develop national benchmarks when it comes to feasibility, sustainability, equity. That would be quite interesting, and analyze the feasibility. This is just an example of the various scenarios. The country teams don't have to submit all the scenarios. Please submit the scenarios that you're comfortable to submit. We propose if you could submit at least the BAU CPS net zero, at least one of these scenarios. So that could help us in the assessment or analysis process. That would be very, very helpful. And this is just an example. So you have the tier one, which is a BAU, CPS, the NDC. So here published scenarios like NDC 1, 2, 3 also can be submitted according to the definitions and description. For LTS, we have the LTS, but then we have the early and the late actions, because as we were looking at the literature, teams have worked on the early and late pathways. So that would be interesting. And for net zeros also, there's a early and delayed kind of emission scenario. What we are also doing additionally is looking at a technological dimension, because in literature, many of the net zero scenarios were observed from an energy supply, like energy demand, like electrification is increased from an energy supply. Like there's a scenario which has higher renewables, there's a scenario which has higher nuclear or hydro or some other form of alternative form of base load that is being shifted from a fossil fuel base load. Then you have the hydrogen, you have the technology-based CDR scenario, and the land-based. Land-based is tier 3, so only if you have, please submit. It's not. And this tier 2 is again voluntary. Only teams, if you have publications you would want to submit, please submit them. That would be really helpful. That would be great. In terms of feedback, so we have already shared the protocol. It would be great to get feedback on this protocol, and we'll open it up for scenario submissions in August. So people can submit their scenarios to the database. What we'll do is by November, if teams have submitted their scenarios, we'll show the initial analysis of this new study and then get feedback. And now that we know the process and most of the teams are participating, have been registered, so I hope this next round would be a quite quicker round than the first study. And we hope like we have the scenario data set and other multiple papers ready by next year, so we can be in line. If we are able to publish, the scenario data set could be used for the IPCC process as well. But at the end, really thankful to all the teams and the members and the modelers around the world, without whom I don't think I would have been able to, I would say, complete the first study so successfully. So these are all the teams who basically registered, and most of them also participated in the first study from various countries. So as you can see, like from Algeria, Argentina, Australia, Austria, Bangladesh, Brazil, ASEAN, Canada, Ethiopia, EU, China, France, Germany, the global teams, Greece, Indonesia, Ireland, Japan, India, Kenya, Mexico, Nepal, Nigeria, Norway, Pakistan, Philippines, Portugal, Republic of Korea, Saudi Arabia, Senegal, so I think Switzerland, Thailand, Tunisia, Turkey, Ukraine, United Kingdoms, United States, and Vietnam. I'm really grateful to all of you who have been really patient with me from modeling process till now, and to make at least this first study so successful. And we hope that we are able to continue this process and more teams become interested, and we are able to set the same kind of exercises that global teams do and provide a bottom-up perspective when it comes to policy making, policy planning, policy implementation, and provide the new data for future work at global, regional, and national level, even a local level. With that, thank you, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you very much, Saritha. We have to end by the top of the hour, so we only have, let's say, 15 or 17 minutes to go. So now we are open for questions. Unfortunately, I cannot see the participants, so I don't know exactly who will raise or who is raising its hand. So I don't know, Pat, if you can help me, because I really cannot see the participants.
Sure, I can help you. No hands have come up yet. So it was very clear. Now we have a hand. Hang on. From Miriam.
Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, hello. Actually, because nobody asked question, I don't have really any question, but just to say, I take the floor to say thank you very much for all this huge and heavy process and all the work that you're doing. That is amazing and really useful, and really thank you so much. Particularly to Saritha, who has made really a lot of effort. Really, thank you. That's it. That's my comment. And hopefully, yes. With the 3Me model, we didn't have the chance to participate in the first round. We were a bit late, but we are going to make all the effort to participate to the second one. So again, thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Yes, I think you are one of the main people. I needed national scenarios from Europe, so I look forward to the scenario submissions from your model across Europe. So that would be a huge advantage for second study, that we are filling in the gaps, and hopefully for Africa also. I'm trying to get teams from Africa if they can also submit. So yeah, thank you so much.
Concerning, are you hearing me? Yeah, still?
Yes.
Yeah, concerning Africa, I was wondering if maybe you already have told it, but I'm sorry. And developing country in general, did you observe? Do you know at least if they have their own modeling capacity, or in general for the model that exists? It's the result of collaboration with Western countries. I just was like, wondering if you know this.
It's a bit of both. So I know, I think South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Algeria, Ethiopia. So they have their own national modeling teams because they were able to register, and some of them were able to submit. So
yeah, sorry,
sorry,
Saritha, I interrupt you because for the example of Algeria particularly, I know it very well because it was with my former modeling team, that is IMACLIM, and in particular, even if it's yes, a local team that submitted, typically it's the result of a collaboration with a French team. So
yes. So then answering your question, I think South Africa, they have the times and then the CGA model. Others, I think it's either a times model or a IMACLIM model. I do not see an individual modeling team, but Osmosis is another modeling team, I think. Mark Howell, who's in charge. So we are getting in touch with him because there are many African teams using the Osmosis, which is a power systems model, but still they are countries. So we are trying to get in touch with them. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saritha. We have Edward Byers with a question, but before we move to Ed, there is a question in the Q&A session here. And someone is asking you if you're considering sector-based national scenarios, modeling, and the related database for submission.
Yes. So when it comes to sectoral models, actually, we had started a survey, but it was not as successful, maybe because of the way we tried to collect the data. So we have some, I think, 30 or 40 sectoral teams who actually submitted, but then because the response was not that high, but we are open. So we have basically data from FLU teams, we have data from power systems modeling teams. So it depends on the data, and if we have at least the emissions data and everything, we are trying to accommodate as much. The only difference would be when it comes to total emissions, we have to be much more aware that it is a sectoral emission than the total emission. So those are certain things when sectoral model teams coming into picture. But as we are also contributing, so we can have like a separate all sectoral models from industry, transport. We could have that separate exercise if a lot of modeling teams come into picture. So we are already doing that in the IAMs, because many IAMs have submitted transport data, industry data. Buildings data was not as much, but we are trying to do, I think, the next study using the sectoral, as we have a good amount of data. So we are trying to do that. So please, if you are there, if you want, please register, and then we could start the process for sectoral model intercomparisons as well. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Saritha. Ed, you have the floor.
Cool. Thanks. Good afternoon. Yeah, so thanks for the great talk. Very interesting. I think a huge congratulations. I hugely appreciate the work that you've done also because I've been through the same pains during the AR6 process. Wanted to pick up, you had the slide on the challenges, and maybe to say to challenge you, but I think we could change a little bit the language that we use also. And we talk about challenges or difficulty in submission. And I would say, I don't think it's difficult to submit to the database. This requires to log in and drag and drop your Excel file. The difficulty, I think, and I see this confirmed from your slide, is challenges in the huge diversity of models conforming to the reporting standards that is defined by this, let's say, this group or the model comparison. And that's the IAMC formats, that's the conventions on reporting variables and so forth, yeah? And I think the great thing about such a big project like this, and I'm curious to hear if you've done this or how we could support the teams, is when you have a number of common models, teams that are using national times models or osmosis or national message ones, that these teams amongst themselves, AIM also for sure has this, I think already, have developed the post-processing scripts to convert the native model output files directly into, do the mapping to IMC, let's say, conventions, and reduce a lot of the headaches that you have experienced and many people are experiencing to get the consistency required to get data into the database, yeah? So I think you've made a huge amount of work on this, and I hope we can support teams to do this more also, yeah? And I think it leads to a big professionalization across the, I would say, sector or world, yeah, in the whole energy systems modeling.
Yeah. Thank you, Ed. I completely agree. I also want to thank you because you are one of kind of the people who did this entire process. I don't know how you did it for the AR6 with the time constraint and everything. It's completely amazing. I really admire you for that. And now that I faced it, it was kind of challenging. What was interesting is I did not have a lot of teams because they had the time to basically transfer their model outputs to the IMC template. So the time constraint was not there because I had 1.5 years. But now with the AR6 process, I'm pretty much sure. And I remember in May, I presented the work to the Osmosis Network, and we had this discussion. So hopefully, when I get in touch with them again, we hopefully are able to work on a script, which then they can share it with all their members of the teams that use Osmosis, and then it would be an easy conversion. So yes, we are actually actively working with teams who may not, and it was always open. So we always, in order to be inclusive, also said it would be great that you start the process so you're aware about the template, but we are there. And when it came to submissions, I definitely helped with the Excel sheet. I went through the Excel sheet. There are times we did it 5 times because with the database, sometimes only one error occurs at a time. So those were certain things. But the teams were very patient. Like I have teams who have submitted like 15, 60 times and they found the error and they worked on it. So they were interested. So that worked in my favor. But yes, actively now that we are looking at certain like AFLU consortium or something like that, we are working on that. And also it's good that you said that you will be available. Kevan also was quite open that they would be open if help is required, they can help in that manner. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Saritha. James Glynn has his hand up, so let me give the floor to him. James.
Thank you, Roberto, and thanks, Saritha. I want to just invite you to give a talk at the winter ETSAP meeting in Paris. I see you've like 3 times teams in the phase 1 database. There's over 60 national times teams, and my comment is that the energy systems and integrated assessment modeling communities can be a little bit fragmented, and some national modeling teams, it'll be utterly obvious the impact of this project, but unfortunately, the majority are ignorant of the good impact of this, and it might be so obvious to you, but you need to keep banging the drum and meeting
Yeah.
national modeling teams. So I would just really invite you to come or deliver a presentation to the ETSAP meeting in Paris virtually, if you wish.
Yeah.
Myself and Bob van der Zwan's team at TNO last year proposed to ETSAP to write the Python script so that everybody using a times model, we would directly plug into the backend SQL database and produce these results. But for whatever reason, they decided not to fund that research, which was stupid in my view. But I think if you just come and raise the flag, you will have many more times teams very willing to produce scenarios for your database.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I would like to inform that many European teams actually participating are Times teams that are participating in this study. So that was quite interesting. The South African team, it's a Times and the CG modeling that they have. I did get in touch with Amit Kanudia, who's also participating in the Times. Like he was one of the systems developer, I think the model developer kind of a thing. And through them, the whole Times network, the ETSAP network. So yeah, basically presenting at the ETSAP workshop would be really helpful and getting everyone who uses a Times model on board. That would be great. I think I also got in touch with the Leaps head because Leaps is also very decentralized kind of, and they also look forward to such process. So because many of the teams I've seen, especially in Latin America, it's I think IMACLEM Leap kind of a combination, the hybrids. So hence I got in touch with them as well. But it's mostly a hybrid model that comes into the picture, or modeling teams that have basically informed national policy through their models that I came in touch with, and some of them randomly, even when I saw a paper, I got in touch with them, and I've also done that. So yeah, definitely. Please,
Sarita, I'll send
I'll
you an email and connect you to the
yeah,
management of ETSAP, and then you follow up with them.
that would be great. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Saritha. I think we have time for only one extra question, and there is a question in the Q&A session here from Ian Burton. I'm going to read his question. He says the following: within the national modeling teams, what dynamics did you see in terms of split between teams using individual national models or repurposing large dominant models, and what were some of the strengths or issues with each other?
So let me rephrase. So it's basically national models and maybe regional models and global models, something like that. Is that the question?
Yeah. Basically, let's say he's like make a distinction between, let's say, individual national models or large models that are being somehow repurposed to
For
focus
the
on specific in countries.
That's a really good question. Actually, we have not gone into the depth. So I think there's in IMC, we have a scientific working group on model diagnostics. And in this next study, with the questions, if you see the socioeconomic policy assumptions, we want to get into the model diagnostics of each of these models that have submitted their scenarios. So hopefully with that exercise, we may, because right now it was just presenting the scenario data, looking at the scenario data. We have not distinguished if a times model versus an AIM model submits a data, how much difference is there? We do see the range. So when you look at the Chinese, I think the EU, China, India, Japan, across models, there's a huge range in their emission pathways, even for net zero. And if we go into the details of the fossil fuel share, the deployment and everything, definitely there's a difference. And we've seen that variance and difference. But why do they do that? Because we did not have the data for that. So I would not be able to answer. But yes, wherever within countries, there were different modeling teams. There was a range in the emission pathways and all the datas. But I think the range could be due to various reasons. Only when we do a model diagnostic kind of a study, I would be able to answer that question. But it was a very interesting question. Thank you so much.
Okay, Saritha, thank you very much. Let's say we have only 1 minute to go, in fact, less than that. So I'd like to thank you, everyone who was here. In fact, we had more than some 60 people attending this session online. Hopefully, many others are going to see the recorded session. And again, thank you very